Hello, this is a video about different ball joints and how they work and mount on a 2003 to 2005 Range Rover L322 front hub. So what you're looking at here is, this is for the, on a North American spec, this is the front right, that's the passenger side hub assembly. So here is where the shock tower, the strut tower would mount to. This is where your brake caliper mounts to, and then over here is your hub, and that's where you would put your brake rotor and then your wheel. And then of course through here you would have your CV output shaft. I believe over here you would have your tie rod, your steering rod. Here you would have your, I believe, your lower control arm, and then here is where you would have your ball joint, which is attached to what you would commonly call your upper control arm. On the L322 Range Rover service manual actually calls it a tie rod arm. It's not the tie rod that steers it, but they call it a tie rod arm, but it's the upper control arm. Now what's nice about the L322 is the ball joints are not fused into the arm. So you could use the arm endlessly by just pushing in and out the bushing. The ball joints are separate, and they are fit into this hole right here, and then they're secured by two bolts into here. So what I have here is the original Land Rover ball joint. This one was pounded out of this really old rusty hub assembly, so it's a little deformed here, but I just want to give you an idea of how it fits in here, and then we'll go over the new replacements. And I have three different brands we're going to cover. We have a Delphi, a Meili, and we have a Moog. And I'm going to talk about my experiences with all of these and my thoughts on quality level and fitment, and we'll do all that. But first, I'll show you how this fits into the hub, because the first line, item that you'd have to do is to get the existing old unit out of there if you wanted to replace it. So how this works is, this is in the hub is in the upright position right now. This is how it would be like on the car. Again, from these two units, you have your strut, shock, spring, air spring tower going up that way. And then the ball joint is press fit from underneath. So it is mounted in the upwards position like this. So I'm going to flip this over. It's pretty heavy. And show you how this fits in here. So basically that fits down in there like that. It's a little tight because it's a little rusty. And then once it's in there, there are two Torx bolts. I believe they're M10 T50 or 55 bolts, I think, that secure those in there. I don't have one of those bolts handy, but that's how it works. So best way to remove this is to, from the reverse side, hit those two bolts with plenty of penetrating fluid. What I like to do is I take a little punch and hammer, and I give the back of the bolts one or two quick jolts to just shock them loose of any rust. Let the penetrating oil work for about 10 minutes, and then I take a Torx head on an impact and I pulse it at full power to get them removed. And I've done this on a couple of cars, and I've never had an issue getting those removed. At that point, you know, the entire shaft of your ball joint, which is going to be protruding further than this is right now because I don't have it pushed all the way, is going to be stuck in here. So what I typically do is I take the thickest punch that you can find, and I get a pretty long one because you're going to want to clear all of the suspension and tie rod components that are attached to this if it's on the car. And I take a very long punch and a small sledge, and I just hammer that until it comes out. Will you destroy the ball joint getting it out? Absolutely. And as you can see by how much of an indentation this has from hammering it to get out of there, the existing ball joint gets destroyed coming out. But that's fine because you're going to replace it anyways. So this did get destroyed. It doesn't move anymore. It's totally bound up. But that is an original Land Rover part right there. Now in getting this one out, you can see some chisel marks right here. I actually tried to hit this lip from the side to spin it a little bit to kind of wiggle it back and forth and loosen the taper where it was kind of fused to the taper, and it kind of gets fused with rust through the years as well. But yeah, that's basically it for removal. And this is, once again, the factory Land Rover part that was installed on this car. So now I want to talk a little bit about replacement options that are out there. I have not purchased a genuine Land Rover replacement ball joint for these cars. I experimented with some aftermarket ones. So I want to talk about those really quick, and in my opinion, what are some of the positives and what are some of the shortcomings of each of these designs. So first and foremost, this is the Delphi. This, let me grab a box here and show you what it looks like. This is the Delphi part. These cost around 17, 18 bucks. I picked this up from Rock Auto. The part number is TC1951. And these parts are, Rock Auto kind of rates them as sort of like, you know, a daily driver or even economy. So Rock Auto is kind of an interesting site. They rate parts based on their quality. They kind of have like a quality metric. I think the lowest is economy, followed by the mid-grade, which is daily driver, and then the premium, which are called premium. So this Delphi, it looks shockingly like the original genuine Land Rover part. And I'm not sure of this, but I suspect that these Delphi ball joints might be the original equipment manufacturer. Delphi may actually produce these for Land Rover, and then of course just, you know, Land Rover takes it and uprates the price and sells them for a god-awful amount of money. But that's common in the auto world if you're not aware of that. But once again, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that the Delphi might be OEM. Now, with that said, this Delphi ball joint has some positives and negatives. First of all, the positive is that if you look at the shaft length for the side of the taper that actually pushes into that hole, it is the same length. And that's a good thing. And let me show you and demonstrate why that's a good thing. When you have this ball joint pressed all the way through that hole, this ball joint with its nipple is facing down. So if you didn't have these bolts fastened into the hub and you just had it sitting in there, this ball joint would, in absolutely no time, just pop right out, and the arm would be dangling loose. And of course, we all know that's a very bad thing. Now, you would think that, judging by how tight this was in there, this used ball joint, when you put a new one in there, well, it must be pressed fit in there, right? You might even need some sort of a tool, or you need to pound it on there. Not necessarily. Even this old rusty thing, what you're going to want to do is take a wire brush and just lightly clean out any rust there. You're not grinding or changing the diameter of that hole. You're just cleaning it up a bit. On the two sides of a car that I did, when I cleaned that hole out, these Delphi ball joints fit very loosely through that hole, and they wouldn't even stay in place. They just kept falling right out. So what that means is the entire fastening of these ball joints into the hole was accomplished by the two bolts here. So that's a little concerning, because that means that all of the force, at least the upwards and downwards force, from this ball joint and how it's attached to this hub, it's held on exclusively by these bolts, so it puts a lot of force on those bolts. That just underlines the importance of having bolts that aren't compromised, that aren't weakened or rusted at all. So in which case you're supposed to replace those bolts anyways, but it would make me a lot more comfortable if the fit was a lot tighter between the shaft of this ball joint and the hole of the hub. So let's just see how this fits in here. I'm not going to press it all the way, but let's just see how tight it is. And I'm inserting it very, very easily. And now it's reached the point where it's reached that second lip, and that's the part that is kind of tapered, and you would hammer that in here from these lugs, and it would give you a nice seat. So this one seems to fit pretty okay with that. You will get some of the taper in there, and it will hold it in by itself, and then you'll have the final security with the bolts, keeping it from escaping that taper. So this is actually a pretty good fit. It fits almost like it does from the factory. So that's the positive side of the Delphi. There is a huge negative with these Delphis, and we're going to cover that next. And to show you that, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to poke at this and show you how little grease there are in these things. There's a very small amount of grease. It may look from on video like there's a lot of grease in here, but there's not. There's a lot of air in here. I can feel it. And then the second part is, if you move this around, it feels very gritty. It almost feels like the grease is totally dried out. It's not. This is a brand new part. I literally got it in the mail yesterday. But it just feels so unsmooth. It feels like a used part, but it's not. And I've been through 6 of these units. I bought 2 of these units. I installed 2 of them. And I was so dissatisfied by how unsmooth and the lack of grease in these things. I actually returned 2 of them under warranty, and I got 2 replacements from Rock Auto. And they feel the same. It feels like there's a lack of grease. It feels like the quality of the ball joint in here is just very low quality. Any other ball joint I've ever used before by other brands feels better than this. So really, this is sort of a, this Delphi is, you have some positives, but you have some negatives with it. But at $17, that's the first offering. So I want to move on to 2 other products, different manufacturers. The next one is made by Meili, and Meili has a pretty well-known brand name. They make a lot of parts. I know there's a lot of opinion out there on what's a good part manufacturer and what's not. In my experience, I've dealt with multiple cars. It really depends on a lot of things. But I found that Meili and other parts, part manufacturers, they make good parts, they make bad parts. But for this specific part, and the part number here is 53-16 space 010 space 0002. And by the way, the Land Rover part number for the ball joint that goes here, which all of these sort of fulfill, is RBK 500210. So onto the Meili ball joint. First thing you'll notice is on the back, it has kind of a big nipple sticking up here, but that shouldn't really affect the install of it. But the biggest thing you'll notice here when you compare it to the factory ball joint is look at the shaft length. The Meili is a lot shorter of a shaft than the original ball joint and the Delphi as well. And that can cause some issues. Now, you'll see here that it has the taper and it has the seat. And that seat is supposed to be press fit into there, but that's not perfect. Once again, my experience with these Meili joints is once you clean this in, this went all the way in. Look at that. Even without cleaning this, with that surface rust in there, this Meili ball joint just very easily pops right in. Look at that. I just popped it right out with my hand and it goes right in. Okay, so this is the biggest problem with these aftermarket ball joints like the Meili, and another one we're going to look at too, is it really doesn't seat on here at all. It's not press fit in there at all. So that's the first issue with it. And the second issue with it is because it has a relatively short shaft length, when you have the ball joint fully seated, it doesn't protrude that much off the back. And the problem that you can have with that is you can kind of wiggle it a little bit in place. And my concern is that whatever lateral forces you have that are horizontal forces across the diameter of the actual shaft may possibly be increased on this ball joint. Let me just give you a comparison to, let's go back to the Delphi, brand new Delphi, and we'll install that not even halfway, not even all the way, about halfway. So that's not even into the seat yet of the ball joint. And however much it's protruding off the back, it's protruding the same amount as the Meili when it's fully seated. And already there is no lateral movement right there. So once you pound this Delphi into its fully driven in position, there will continue to be no lateral movement. And that really kind of gives me a greater sense of security when using the Delphi. You see, I can pull it out, I can wiggle it. Once you approach that seat, there's no more lateral movement. You don't see that wiggling right there. Let's go back to the Meili. Let's fully seat the Meili. And look at that movement right there. That scares me a little bit. But then again, go to the ball joint, and once you kind of break it loose from its factory movement, that ball joint feels so much smoother than the Delphi. So that's your trade-off. You can have really smooth ball joint movement the way a ball joint is supposed to feel, but have this possible safety issue with lateral movement and it not thick enough seat to actually press fit in here. Or you could have a inferior quality ball joint, in my opinion, but a proper shaft length and no lateral movement with that. All right, so that's the Meili. This, I believe, goes for, it might be like $1 or $2 more than the Delphi. It's all about the same. So there's that. Now both of these, the Meili and the Delphi, they both come with Newcastle nuts, and these are locking nuts. The Meili, the nut that comes with the Meili is actually all metal. It has a metal locking function on here. For the Delphi, it has a nylon insert locking nut with it. So just things to be cognizant of. I don't know, what's better or worse, but for suspension components, I don't know. I've seen nylon lock nuts be used. I've seen metal lock nuts be used. Either way, they are not reusable, but just be cognizant. Maybe nylon lock nuts are cheaper, I don't know, but just something to be concerned of. And then the last option, which Rock Auto at least sort of advertises as being the premium ball joint, is, let's grab over here, is a Moog product. And these are about $20 a pop. So again, just a couple dollars more. And the product number for this Moog ball joint is K500146. And for this, the first thing you'll notice is it comes with a castle nut, a metal castle nut, but it also comes with 2 hex bolts that fit into these ball joint bolt down points. So one of the biggest problems that Range Rover techs or owners or DIYers who change these ball joints is they don't have the part number for the bolts that go here. I don't have that handy right now, but I know it, and I'll post it in the description below. But those Torx bolts that are factory on here, if you strip the Torx bolts getting it out, you mess that up, good luck getting it out of there. It's going to be a lot of work getting it out of there. I'm not saying you can't. You can, because you can access the back of the bolt shaft from behind. But if you mess the bolt out, if you mess the bolt taking it out, you would have to replace it with something. And you don't want to just run to Home Depot and get whatever bolt you can find. These are suspension components, so you have to use a bolt of the same tensile strength, which would be like a 10.9 or a 12.9, I believe the number is, tensile strength. It's certified for a certain amount of pressure and tensile strength. And you don't want to take any chances with the bolts here, especially when you have seat issues with some of these. So the Moog comes with new bolts. They have a little bit of Loctite. They've some sort of like locking compound that they've pre-applied to these bolts, and that's nice. And it's also nice that they have a hex head, right? So this is a lot more difficult to strip. And these have like some sort of black oxide coating, so it's going to last a long time as well. Now, where the Moog really becomes a premium part, as Rock Auto says, and the price commands, is if you look at, let's just compare them to the Meili, which is, in my opinion, a higher quality ball joint than the Delphi. And just take a look at this. Number one, with the Meili, you don't have any visible coating on here. Yeah, there's a possibility there might be some sort of coating on here, but it doesn't appear to be. But if you step up to the Moog, you'll see, oh, well, there's a black coating on there, okay? So right off the bat, that might help with corrosion and rust prevention. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is you look at the Moog, and look at that. It has a longer shaft. All right, so that's of paramount importance, as we already discussed. It has a much longer shaft than the Meili. And then the third thing is, if you kind of poke at this, yeah, there's a little bit of air in there, but I can feel a lot more grease than what was in the Delphi. And let's go ahead and break this loose. Ow. Wow. wow, that is really smooth. It has absolutely no rough feeling points. It's just smooth in every direction. This is actually much smoother than the Meili, and infinitely smoother than the Delphi. Wow, that's a good ball joint. So that's the Moog, and let's go ahead and sort of test fit it in the ball joint hole. So I'm gonna go past the taper and into the seat, and I'm started working it in the seat, and now it's locked in there, but it's not all the way pushed in. And already I can see right there, when you're in that seat, it does move a little bit if I come out of the seat a little bit, but that's a much, much better fit than the Meili. And you can see when I've just touched the front of the seat, that's protruding the same length as with the Meili when it's seated in its full position. So these Moog ball joints really do seem like really, really premium parts. So anyways, that's just my short video describing issues with the ball joints in the L322. Again, this is specifically for 2003 to 2005 Range Rover, full size. But these ball joints, I believe the same type of ball joint with the bolts are used on the later full-fat Range Rovers from 06 and on. For the Discoveries, I believe their ball joints don't have bolt locations. So for those, if it's just a press-fit ball joint with no bolts, it's even more critical that you have a properly sized seat. And you don't skimp when buying aftermarket components. You have to make sure that they seat fully. If you take an existing ball joint out and you can push it in there and pull it right out, and that seat isn't press fit, that's a recipe for disaster. I would return those parts immediately before installing them and getting something that's proper, that will seat properly. So once again, I'm not dissing on any auto parts manufacturers. I've used Meili parts in a lot of my vehicles, and they make some really, really high quality parts. But for this application, for this ball joint and the Range Rover, I would not recommend it. Because of that, you should not be able to push it all the way in and pull it out. That's dangerous. For this application, if you have to go the cheap way, use a Delphi, but I wouldn't even recommend that because the quality of that ball joint is just so bad. It feels so choppy. There are parts where it doesn't really want to move, and it does not have enough grease in there. Yeah, you could get one of those needle grease adapters and kind of get in here and refill it if you want, but you're buying a brand new ball joint. It should be perfect the way it comes to you. You could step up to this Moog, and I think that I'm just so impressed by how smooth these Moog ball joints are, how much grease is in there, the quality of those, and the fact that the shaft length is the proper length. Look at that, same as factory. I'm so impressed by these Moog, and I like the fact that they included the bolts as well. I think for this application, this is the only one I can recommend. So with that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope it helps someone. You won't really find much documentation about what I've been talking about here. People talk about, oh, well, you know, I had issues with the ball joint, and oh, I went back to the factory, and that solved the factory Land Rover part, and that solved everything. Well, if my suspicions are true that the Delphi is actually OEM, and OEM, I don't know what the cost is. Let's just, you know, based on my experience with other Land Rover parts, say they charge 50 bucks a pop. That's a ripoff. You don't want to buy a $50 Land Rover part if the exact same OEM part from Delphi is $17. Just get the Delphi then. But if you do want the best, and these ball joints, you know, these are pretty important parts attached to that upper control arm, or tie rod arm as Land Rover calls it. Just buy the Moog. Just get it over with. Get new bolts with it, because when you add the cost of new OEM Torx bolts from Land Rover and using the Delphi, you're probably way over the cost of even just one of these ball joints. So really, 50 bucks for two of these, shipped to you. You can get a Rock Auto anywhere else that carries them. I can't speak highly enough of these. So anyways, once again, I hope this helps someone, and that's it for today.